Hey everyone, Cody Hayes here, and I'd like to welcome you to this lecture where we are looking at ethics and stories, plus a little bit of the divine command theory, and I have some images on the screen. I have an image of the story of Bearskin from the Brothers Grimm, and then the story of the Good Samaritan in the Gospel of Luke, and then Michelangelo's image of God creating the world in the Sistine Chapel. Well, in terms of ethics, stories serve as a form of teaching. Basically, when I have students, for example, write over a question regarding a story, the question is usually, what do you think that the author wanted the reader or the listener, the audience, to take away from the story? That what was the point behind it? What were they trying to tell them or inform them? And essentially, we have three different types of stories. One type is myths. Well, a myth is a story of great importance, regardless of how historically accurate it is. Now, in terms of myths, particularly within religious studies, what is considered a myth would be a creation story. And, in our part of the world, the creation story that we are the most familiar with is the story in Genesis. But to use a different religion and their creation story, I'll mention the one in Hinduism. In Hinduism, the creation story surrounds this cosmic man, this giant called Purusha, and how the gods, or the god more specifically, sacrifices Purusha, and his body parts fall, and his body parts create the world. But in terms of the body parts that became human, you had different types of humans. You had from the head what was called the Brahmin, or the priest caste. And then from around the chest, you have the warrior or nobility caste. And then around the stomach area, you have the merchant caste. And then at the feet, you have the servant caste. Now, could you prove what I just talked about through history? Could it be a proven story beyond question? No. Does it matter? No. Because the point is how the importance here in relating to basically that you have different types of people, which is an idea, behind the caste. That you have different people born into a different type of caste. And of course, this relates a lot with the theology in Hinduism of karma and reincarnation. But the point, again, is to show the purpose of the story is to show that you have, different types of people, and this is a reason explaining why. Another type of story, fairy tales. Well, fairy tales are basically stories for children, told to children, to teach them and also to entertain them. Now, in this class, the story that I use with ethics and stories, particularly with fairy tales, is the story of Bearskin from the Brothers Grimm. In my intro to philosophy, I use a different story from the Brothers Grimm. I use the story of Godfather Death. And I will mention that, in my view, what the author, whomever originally may have told the story, as it may not have been the Brothers Grimm, but whomever originally told the story, from my point of view, the point behind it was that death could come at any time, and that included children, and something children need to be aware of. To put it another way, until really the period of modern medicine, almost anything could kill a person. One of my former professors, who was a chaplain, a hospital chaplain, she mentioned how someone that she met in the hospital cut her finger, and the finger got infected, and of course they used antibiotics to treat it. But before that, there was pretty much two choices. One was death, or the other might have been amputation that could get it in time. But the point to be said here is that, death could come at any time. And if you look at literature in Europe, from before the period of modern medicine, there is plenty of information regarding about how you need to be ready to die. You need to prepare to die because it could come at any time, and that would involve children just as well. So stories like Godfather Death, reinforce that death could come at any time. And another particular type of story, parables. Well, parables are essentially allegorical stories that are told to adults to explain what they should do. And of course, the image I have on the screen with the parable is the story of the Good Samaritan from the Gospel of Luke. Well, I want to read that story from the Gospel of Luke and then comment on it just a little bit. Just then, a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" He answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this, and you will live." But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and fell into the hands of robbers, who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, "Take care of him, and when I come back I will repay you whatever more you spend." Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? He said, "The one who showed him mercy." Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." Now, course, it's an allegorical story, it's a parable, but the main thing that certainly would be a reference to the audience of that time was Jews and Samaritans did not get along. And there's a lot of history behind that, which I'm not going to get into, but they did not get along. So the fact that Jesus used a Samaritan as one who treated this particular individual, a fellow Jew, properly, that would mean something to that audience. That would have a strong effect. And so, when the person asking Jesus the question, and, who's my neighbor, Jesus tells the story, and then asks, this individual, now who do you think is the neighbor? And the person says, the one that showed the man compassion. And then when Jesus says, go and do likewise, but the use particularly of a Samaritan there would really stand out to that particular individual. Because like I said, Jews and Samaritans did not get along. So, a little bit of the divine command theory here. So, divine command theory, what is it? Well, simply put, what is right or what is wrong is decided by a divine or heavenly being such as God. So, when God says, do this, this is always right. And when God says, do not do this, this is always wrong. For this class, I go about the divine command theory in a different way than I do in my intro to philosophy. In that class, I use the story of Abraham and Isaac, particularly involving the potential sacrifice of Isaac by Abraham. And one of the things that I do is I explain how the Jewish people have a tradition of arguing with God, go through some of the brief history of explaining it, and then asking the question, should Abraham have acted in the manner that he did that's described in the text? Which, of course, in the text, when God says to sacrifice Isaac, Abraham goes and, does the deed. Of course, the angel comes and stops him, but he goes and does the deed, And I asked, should Abraham have acted that way? Or should he have maybe argued with God about it, which, of course, the Jews have a history of doing so. That kind of thing. Well, in any case, that's all that we have for this lecture. It was very, very brief. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to send me a message in the Q&A forum or send me an email. Till then, take care.